The main monsters we encountered in Poppy Playtime aren't necessarily the main villains. It might turn out that even the prototype isn't the main threat because the prototype is just a consequence. It's important for us to know who's behind all these terrible experiments and whether the real culprits are alive. You know, our favorite monsters didn't just appear out of nowhere. It's thanks to our dear scientists. Now we need to find out who the real monster is. A tremendous and fantastic job was done to transfer consciousness into toys, which was simply unimaginable. Initially, it was believed that these experiments would grant immortality, but it turned out people were dying as toys, victims of the same experiments they underwent. In the end, it all turned into a mass slaughter called Hour of Joy. The Monster Creation Project wasn't just randomly conceived, it had its leaders. So, who are they? Who's truly to blame for everything that happened? Our first suspect is Stella Greybear. You might have heard her name mentioned multiple times in all the chapters, and as it turns out, she's no ordinary employee. In fact, she was the head of Playcare, or at least responsible for it and everything happening within. Not much is known about Stella except for theories that she might be the Poppy doll, but I doubt it. Her friendly and cheerful demeanor is emphasized. She seems quite sociable, and overall she joined this company because she doesn't want to grow up. She always feels like her childhood hasn't ended. At least that's what she says in an interview on the first cassette of the first chapter. And maybe it's precisely because of her playful and energetic nature that she ended up in Playcare. I have no doubt that the kids loved her. Her company didn't just appoint her to run the daycare. All reports about the orphans in Playcare were directed to her. She possessed quite valuable information. Essentially, Stella Greybear is one of the high-ranking employees, and she couldn't have been unaware of the experiments. In the third chapter, we find out that experiments were also conducted on the children, and the most famous experiment, of course, is 1188 catnap. How could Stella not know about the experiments when she was in charge of Playcare? Therefore, she's aware of what's happening. Although in the same third chapter, there was one cassette featuring Stella, and it feels like she has no idea what's going on.
Oh, Mr. and Mrs. Hartman, come on in. Please, have a seat. How was your ride down?
It was, nothing like we were expecting. Mr. Ludwig's speech was, well, it just confirms for us that you're the orphanage we want to go through.
It's a truly magical place. I felt right at home from the second I entered. You opened that door the first time and you just know you're never going to leave. Kind of like finding a home as a child and always thinking of it when you want to feel comforted. I understand you want to give Jeremy that home? Yes, and we would like to adopt. Ah, amazing. You'll be perfect for... What? Well, it appears there's been some complications. Complications? What kind of complication? I don't know. Form says testing. What does that mean? Tell us. What does that mean?
Miss Greybear, we deserve a better explanation than that. Don't you think?
You're in charge of all this. How could you not know?
And why are we only finding out about this now?
I don't. I'm sorry.
We can hear this recording on the pink cassette precisely in Stella's former office, and she seems perplexed. Could this confusion in her words indicate that Stella isn't aware of what's really happening in the company? Maybe. But still, it's worth considering that she's one of the high-ranking employees, and children were already being experimented on. If Stella wasn't supposed to know about it, other leaders would have taken care of it earlier. Another cassette explains something similar. There was a conversation between a scientist and a child where the man clearly had to lie to the child, saying his friend was very, very ill. Although at the beginning of the recording, he already referred to the child as the subject. Stella couldn't understand why a healthy child was sent for some test when his future parents had just arrived to finalize custody. So, things are still complicated with this girl. Eddie Ryman, the head of the research department, should have known about the experiments. He was entrusted with a truly important task, as evidenced by a document he addressed to the construction company, Warrenbach, which was building the laboratory in Playtime. Eddie writes on behalf of the Playtime Coder Toy Factory. Yes, this must be kept in complete secrecy. Only those who have authority at Warrenbach and those who have authority here at Playtime should know about this project as promised. For this secrecy, you will be very well compensated, over $100,000. Given that this is an approximate figure, we are ready to provide the necessary equipment for unpacking. However, the more independently you can work, the greater the compensation I can offer. I still want the laboratory to be completed within 12 months, but most importantly, everything must be done correctly. Let me know if these terms suit you. I am willing to negotiate until we find something satisfactory for both parties. Regards, Eddie Ryderman. So, Playtime Company made a direct order, and only important people from the construction company and Playtime were supposed to know about it. They were even willing to pay quite a hefty sum for silence. $100,000 is not a small amount. And this document confirms that Eddie knew everything and carefully tried to conceal all the company's dirty deeds. He was willing to pay for this secrecy and paid, but nothing is known about this guy yet. We haven't even heard his voice. Maybe Eddie was so afraid for his safety that he didn't make any recordings, or he wasn't the main guy. But who's more important? There are such jerks. Harley Sawyer, Dr. Harley Sawyer, if you felt sorry for Theodore, aka Catnap, blame this jerk. He's the one responsible for Theodore becoming a fanatical, aggressive cat monster. We found this idiot, and maybe he's the one who came up with all these experiments. Yes. It's the same scientist who appears on the cassette with the prototype. Apparently, Mr. Sawyer wanted to understand what this thing actually was. Maybe the prototype was created by the doctor himself during the experiments and precisely in the doctor's laboratory. However, Harley Sawyer treats the prototype as his own property, forcing it to speak. If you don't say anything, I'll find out anyway. Don't want to? We'll make you. On one of the tapes in the 3rd chapter, the connection between the cat and Harley Sawyer is emphasized, though there we already hear another bastard, Leith Pierre, the head of the innovation department, who worked almost hand in hand with Dr. Sawyer. They are very much alike, and it's unclear who's worse. One openly mocks the prototype, and the other teases the catnap, and this scum was directly involved in creating all the monsters. In Play Company, unlike Dr. Sawyer, Leith Pierre had long deserved his high-ranking position. He mostly helped the doctor and even replaced him in separate cases. Remember that VHS tape with the runaway Huggy Wuggy? It was Leith Pierre's signature on the document about the disappearance of employees. It's unlikely that any ordinary department head would sign such serious documents. Employees simply vanished. They were killed, and it's as if nothing happened. Perhaps this document was also classified just to show us who's really in charge, and it's Leith Pierre. And finally, the head of this whole madness, Elliot Ludwig, was most likely a normal guy himself. He founded his company, had a wonderful family, and even though all his family members died, he continued his work, and the company truly thrived under him. So why did he allow such monsters, which I described earlier, to literally take over the company and create all this horror? Did he even know about it? There are no sins traced back to Elliot himself. However, after his death, bodies without organs and bones were found in his house. And the neighbors have repeatedly emphasized that Elliot Ludwig returned home at strange hours and immediately left again at night. His name also frequently pops up. Most likely he was already the leader when all these experiments began. Perhaps Elliot Ludwig really wanted to do better, and he may not have known about the results of the experiments because he died. And then, all the power in the company could have been seized by Leith Pierre. And that's when all the fun began. So, as for the founder and leader of the company, it's hard to say much. Perhaps because of the death of his family, he went a little crazy, and then he started doing more than just risky things like creating Playcare. And this meant additional expenses, nerves, and so on. He went even further and still agreed to Dr. Sawyer's proposal. It's quite a tangled story, but at least we know about 3 main figures. And I'm sure they're all scumbags, aren't they? What do you think about all this? Who do you think is to blame? Write your theories and opinions in the comments!